So welcome everybody to the fourth Bradford Cloud User Group event. So this is our April event, and this month we are dedicating it to Microsoft Teams. So we have two amazing sessions planned. First up, we will have Sam O'Donnell, who's going to be presenting modern ways of working in the new world. He's got a really good demo planned. And I am actually quite proud to announce that Sam will be also presenting at the Comsverse conference that's going to be happening in a few months' time. He found out about 10 minutes ago, so he said I could announce that. After that, we'll do a bit of a Q&A if anyone's got any questions for Sam. And then we'll hand over to Zoe Wilson Luke Evans, who will be doing a session around requirements and challenges that Microsoft Teams users typically have presented. So some really good sessions. Without further ado, I will hand over to Sam to start his session.
Thanks, Shabazz. Thanks for the invite, guys. It's good to do this. So as Shabazz has already alluded to, I found out about 10 minutes ago that my session was selected for Comsverse, which is, for those of you that know what Comsverse is, it's a 2-day Teams-centric event, which is being hosted at Mercedes-Benz World in Weybridge. So it was meant to be scheduled for the end of June, however, due to for obvious reasons and a poll done by the organisers, it was decided to push back till September. Which is good because it gives you more time to prepare, especially seeing as if you've watched the podcast video from Shabazz and the guys. There's going to be a lot of focus on new presenters, main stage, all the lights, all the bells and whistles. Microsoft are going to be there, so there's no pressure whatsoever, for that. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. So the session that I'm going to talk to you today about is around about modern ways of working, and it's around Microsoft Teams rooms. So it's how are we getting people back into the office? How are we making our users, our customers, comfortable coming back to the office, touching things in a meeting room, working in a meeting environment, but also taking away that uncomfortable someone's at home situation where you've got someone listening in at home, getting them more involved. And there's various things and technologies around that. And some of those are Surface Hub and Microsoft Teams rooms and some of the advancements that Microsoft have done on those. I haven't got a Microsoft Teams room device really to show you, but I will show you the Surface Hub, which is right behind me. I'll show you some of the features around there that can make collaborative working easier, especially if people are remote, if they've got touch-enabled devices and all that stuff. So I've promised Shabazz I'll try and keep this as short and as quick as possible. He is going to give me a kick under the table if I start rambling too much. But basically, modern ways of working. What are Microsoft Teams rooms? What is a Surface Hub? What are Microsoft Teams room devices? And understanding various different types of meeting room spaces. So modern ways of working. Meeting needs are changing. Our customers' employees are more mobile. Okay, people want to work more remotely and work from home. Statistics are a little bit out of date. There is some more modern ones. I'm still waiting for the official stats to come out. But at the moment, 70% of employees will be working remotely. We all know that over the last year, that has shot up and increased. 56% of meetings have at least one remote attendee. Again, I'd probably say that's closer to 70%. I'd say 2/3, our meetings are virtual in nature. If not all meetings have been virtual in nature. And 38% of remote attendees join via mobile using audio conferencing, so you dial into a conference, or even using the Teams mobile app to join a meeting, or iPad, or something along those lines. The hybrid approach. So a hybrid workplace is emerging. Some employees, will work remotely indefinitely. Some will work from the office, and some will elect to do both. And 82% of company leaders plan to allow employees to work from home some of the time. Now, The company that I work for, those companies that Shabazz works for, Net Company, they are taking that approach where you can work from home some of the time, all right? Projects depending, customer depending, meetings depending, all that kind of stuff. If we're doing a client demo, and all the stuff's in the office to do the client demo, so therefore you're going to come to the office and do the demo. But if it's just a virtual meeting, a discussion, a workshop, then you can do that remotely. Then do that remotely. Ooh, skipping ahead. 74% of employees. So this poll was taken last year, end of last year. 74% of employees say they miss human interaction about being in the office. Having that conversation with someone over a desk, leaning next to somebody, having that quick chat around, while you're making a coffee, bumping into somebody walking down the stairs. People miss that interaction. I, for one, really struggled working from home initially the first time round, when I literally rolled out of bed, jumped in the shower, and then sat at my desk, and then eat, sleep, rinse, repeat for the first few weeks, especially when we had to isolate due to my son getting symptoms. And that really took its toll because I was still working. Luckily there was, it was just a bit of the sniffles, but hey, that's what 4-year-olds get when they go to the nursery. But you had to take the precautions back in the early days because no one really knew what was happening, and that whole human interaction, that having that conversation with somebody, was just different. Also, sitting in the same room, day in, day out, just seemed too much. Oh, again, skipping ahead. 55% of workers say that collaborating with other people is harder at home. Now, although I'd like to disagree, and I can see arguments for and against, it's only as hard as organizations want to make it. How can we improve that collaboration experience by working at home? It's all about making people inclusive into the meetings and how that works. Just simple things like having a camera on. Enforcing a company policy that says if you have a meeting, put your camera on, so you still see that face-to-face interaction. Improves people's moods and mentalities all the same. Collaboration is key. More than 50% of work done today is accomplished through collaboration. That is people sharing documents. We all know the wonders of SharePoint. I can open a document, Shabazz can open a document, Imran can open a document, and we can all work on that same document at the same time. Collaboration is key, but at the same time, you want to have that, again, conversation, that video, that talking, that whole sort of way of working to be able to collaborate with each other to get your job done. Again, we've seen there's a rise of remote working, hybrid working, where 70% of positions will work somewhere other than the office at least one day a week. During the break in the last lockdown, I knew someone who would go and sit outside in Starbucks in the summer, outside because they could, and that's what the restrictions allowed, and worked on his laptop for 3 hours a day just to get out in the sunshine, and was able to do that. Workspace evolution. I don't know if anyone's seen Google's offices. They've got slides, they've got beanbags, they've got TVs everywhere, they've got pinball machines, you've got table football. Okay, workers can choose their own office conditions, or if you let them choose their office conditions, you can increase productivity by over 25%. Just having that 5 minutes away from your desk and turning your brain off completely from all the multiple Teams meetings or Zoom meetings or whichever, applications that you use. Just having that time away and doing something completely different and work related kind of resets your brain and allows you to engage better when you come back to your desk. So the modern workplace is emerging. All right? Teamwork anywhere is a key importance. Fluid team collaboration is even more important. But bringing remote teams together is probably the key part. Net Company is split over multiple different geographical locations. A lot of our customers are split over multiple geographical locations. And for them to be able to have a video call or voice call with somebody in the organization as if they're sat across from them, is an absolute winner to those organizations. And Teams can help you do that. On that side, you've got devices that can help you do that. And Microsoft Teams and Microsoft have a Surface range, a Surface device such as a Surface Hub 2S, that thing there. A thin and lightweight device enables mobile, cordless, uninterrupted teamwork. And you can turn any workspace into a team workspace, so a collaboration space. All right, and Unfortunately, the one behind me doesn't have a battery, but if you've got a battery on it, you can wheel it around the office, for up to 100 minutes before it needs recharging again. So if you just have that idea, that collaboration area, or even if you don't have a meeting room booked, but you've got a couple of people sat around a desk, you can wheel the Surface Hub there, and you can whiteboard, you can draw, you can collaborate on a PowerPoint and stuff like that. Be seen, be heard, and actively participate in group discussions with really good technology. Using the Surface Hub, even if you're not using it just to collaborate on documents, okay, you can use it as a video calling device, okay, across company departments, geographically dispersed locations. And again, as I mentioned, you can whiteboard, you can draw, and you don't have to do it in a Teams meeting. You can do it as a standalone device. Just wheel it in, sign into your Office 365 apps, and you can get all your documents, your OneDrive, your Power BI, your Word documents, your PowerPoint documents, your whiteboard stuff across all those devices. Microsoft Teams, it is the hub for teamwork in Microsoft 365. That and Viva. I haven't quite got my head around Viva yet, so if anyone's seen it, it's meant to kind of take that one step further. But meetings, calls, chats, files, apps, and workflows, so you can have additional apps, you can have additional workflows using Power Automate, and you can get it all integrated into Teams as well. So the ultimate endpoint for Teams and Office 365 collaboration, of course, the Surface Hub. Okay, it's something that does everything that you would need it to do in the office. So COVID-19. Teams meetings and staying connected. I've got a short video. Hopefully it plays well. Okay, but it just talks about the sort of touchless experience, how coordinated joins, Surface Hub, MTRs, room remotes, all that kind of stuff. However, and I just realised I didn't share my screen with audio, so just bear with me. Hopefully that should play. If you don't hear any sound, give me a kick.
Connecting people working in the office with those working from home has never been more important. Microsoft Teams devices help power more inclusive and efficient meetings for people everywhere. And touchless experiences help you interact with these devices without worry. Kick off a meeting in a conference room using your personal device or using voice commands.
Hey Cortana, join my meeting.
Enrich your conference room experiences with coordinated meetings. A new way to collaborate that brings Microsoft Teams rooms and a Surface Hub together. With coordinated audio and video, so you can maximize screen real estate and take teamwork to the next level. In a meeting, you can use your Teams mobile app to interact with meeting room devices. Room capacity notifications help remind you of social distancing requirements by alerting you when there are too many people in a room. To ensure everyone's voice is heard no matter their location, participants can now raise their hand to get the room's attention. And live captions make it easy to follow along. Use your personal Surface Pro X pen to collaborate and interact on a Surface Hub. And whether you're in the room or anywhere else, you can still work together from your own device. End the meeting from your personal device, use a voice command.
Hey Cortana, end my meeting.
Or just walk away. Everything will shut down automatically. Keep work flowing and stay connected no matter where you're working with touchless experiences on Teams devices in Microsoft 365.
So some of the good things that we have around Office 365 and Teams, especially in the last 12 months, it has been such an evergreen product. There is so much changing all the time with Office 365. And Teams, again, in particular, they've had huge competition from Zoom and WebEx and things like that to try and outdo themselves, if you will, to try and make themselves a better product. But we all know that the Teams is the best product out there for this kind of thing. The collaboration, the video calling, all that kind of things. It's just everything that we need and can do at organizations. So bringing people back into the office, people might have that hesitance about touching a meeting room device in the middle of the desk. So being able to do the Hey Cortana proximity joins, you walk in already with your laptop, you can join the meeting. You join a meeting on your laptop, it will say, oh, you're in this room. We suggest this room. You click on it and it will join your meeting into that room. So where you can then join, you can use that technology of a room on using your laptop, if that makes sense. Coordinated join with Surface Hubs and MTRs, one device. You present it as one device. And room remotes, so Teams mobile, if you have your personal mobile and you go into a room and you can control things, the volume, the mute, the camera on, end the call using your own personal device. So you're reducing that touching of stuff in the middle. And it just kind of sets people at ease. We spoke to a few people. I think it's a fantastic idea, some of these features, because they've done polls within their own organizations and they've gone, yeah, some people are saying, well, I don't want to, how clean is the office? How clean are we making these areas? And so just by saying, we can do this or we can offer this, it does really put people's minds at ease. So what are Microsoft Teams rooms? So Microsoft Teams rooms, okay, so not a Surface Hub, a Microsoft Teams room device. Okay, it's a Windows 10 IoT or Windows 10 Enterprise device. Okay, you can get them with Android, so formerly were called collaboration bars. Microsoft Teams rooms are on Android, MTR OAs. Okay, they run a version of Android with the Android Teams app over the top of them. Surface Hub devices, okay, it runs the sort of a special version of Windows 10, the Windows 10 Teams edition. The current version runs on the 20H2 build. Okay, and you can get common area devices again, depending on what type of device it is, whether it's a spider phone or just a normal phone. Okay, as long as they're running Android with the Teams OS on top of it or the Teams app, and they will work as well. And again, there's a lot of work been going on around for Microsoft to try and invest in that technology, in that space, by making everything look the same. So the Teams device on your app, so the Teams app on your mobile phone will be the same or similar layout to what you'd see in a meeting room on your Teams on your laptop. So that adoption process makes it a bit easier. So people can come back. They've been using Teams for the last 12 months in a remote environment, using it on their laptop, but they can see the buttons are very similar to what's on the meeting room device. So straight away, their brain's going to link those two together and say, right, that's a hang up button, or that's a meet button, that's a dial pad. So they kind of know that already from dealing what they had with the Teams app. So what can you do? Microsoft Teams rooms, their Teams apps on a device, and you've got Surface Hub 2S. Cleaner. Primary focus, okay, so you can have, depending on your size of space, depends on what type of device you need, okay, and again, it's all about making people inclusive, having that social distance, that area, that wide open space, okay. If you want to have an 85-inch Surface Hub in there, and you've got a space that will accommodate that, and everyone can spread out, and everyone can see it, then yeah, fine, have an 85-inch Surface Hub. If you've got a small space where you can't fit an 85-inch Surface Hub, but you've only got a space for 2 or 3 people, a 50-inch Surface Hub will do. If it's just going to be used for calling, a Poly C60 spider phone with the Teams app installed, that will do. So it's all about re-evaluating what you've got in your environment, and how you incorporate those room personas into something that suits. Just a bit nervous. What's going on there? Let me move that for you. All right. So, how do you define these types of spaces, and what kind of devices would you use in these types of spaces? So, at a glance, we've got a top device configuration. This is a Microsoft slide, so it's very device agnostic. There's various different types of devices on here. Okay, and depending on what type of room you've got, and these are your room personas along on top. You've got a large office, you've got a focus room, huddle open space, small conference room, medium conference room, large conference room, extra large meeting space. And it's all about making them inclusive. So if everyone can see, everyone can be seen, everyone can be heard. Again, but that's just the meet and present side of things. If you want the meet and co-create, if you want people to be able to physically participate, touch things, and whiteboard or share documents or show people what they do. I love whiteboarding. Rarely a day goes by where I'm sat there with a pen drawing on a whiteboard, or even using the whiteboard app to draw documents or diagrams or annotate things. It's just a great little device for that. And with coordinated join in some of the larger spaces, okay, you can coordinate these two devices. You can have them so they act as one device. A meeting room device with a camera and the speakers and microphones You can also have a Surface Hub there at the same time, and they will act as one room, as one device. You walk into the meeting, press go, or join my meeting on the Surface Hub or the MTR, and both will spring into life and join the same meeting. Makes it that bit easier for the end user. So deploying a Surface Hub, MTRs and Surface Hubs connect to the online infrastructure. You can do it on-premise. You can have on-premise Surface Hubs. We're using Azure, actually they're on-premise, Skype Business, Exchange. However, in the way that the world is moving, the way technology is moving, and the way that we can all collaborate together, Office 365 is key. And the recommended approach at the moment is to join them online. So easy for management, easy for device management. And you can include things like Azure AD. You can enroll them into Intune. You can apply various different, Endpoint Manager, not Intune. Into Endpoint Manager, you can change policies, you can create different processes, and you can really secure them, but you can also maintain them and manage them from remote locations as well. So the boring bit, licensing. So Microsoft Teams Room. To license Microsoft Teams Room, okay, there's two different types of licenses available at the moment. There's a Microsoft Teams Room Standard Edition and Microsoft Teams Room Premium. Now, there's a hell of a lot more in a premium version than a standard version, but there's a hell of an increase in cost. And this will be sort of your deciding factor on what local IT you have. On if you've got a large organization with 600 meeting rooms, do you have people in these offices who can maintain and secure some of these areas and ensure you've got support? If you don't, then maybe the premium room might be good enough for those areas, but the standard might be good enough for ones where you do have support and people there on hand. But the key points that both cover, is a Skype for Business Plan 2. Now, Skype for Business Online goes end of life July 31st this year. So Microsoft Teams, as long as it has a Microsoft Teams account and registered with Microsoft Teams as an endpoint, it can work. Phone system, so you can integrate it into your direct routing or calling plans. You can get calling features and stuff like that within the Surface Hub and on the MTR devices. Audio conferencing, so it can be an endpoint for audio conferencing. And also Endpoint Manager, formerly Intune, so you can manage and maintain the device. And the premium does come with lots of other great stuff. Okay, it's relatively new to the market, the premium license, but it's things like device management, inventory management, service desk integration, and security update management. So if there's a security update available to the MTR device, it will apply those updates for you when they're not being used. That said, the MTR premium license is not supported on Surface Hubs yet. I hope to see it come. I imagine it will do eventually, but I think there's a bit more logistics involved in the support of the hardware and things as well. So what is a Surface Hub? It's that nice big thing behind me with a sleek, slim design, really good 4K screen, really good 4K camera, great resolution. Okay, it's perfect for Microsoft Teams, okay, and great for whiteboarding. It's a really good digital canvas. I can sign into Office 365 on it. I can open up my files. I can open any recent PowerPoints, anything I've been working on, my whiteboard. The pen is really great as well. It's a fully integrated Windows 10 device. Okay, it does run third-party apps, but there are some limitations depending on the apps. It's got to follow the UWP framework, and if you have the battery, it's and the case, and the stand, okay, it can move around certain areas. Unfortunately, I don't have a battery on this one, so it is plugged in. But with a battery, again, it lasts about 100 minutes on a full charge. So, what is it? Physically, what is it? What's it got? So there's USB-C ports for cameras. You can also get a fingerprint reader if you deploy it in a different mode, and we'll cover that shortly. Loads of different bits at the bottom. Okay, there are some for input and outputs. There are various different ports that support touchback and all that kind of great stuff. Ethernet, if you didn't want to, for various reasons, you might have wireless, or if the device is physically stuck to a wall, so you can wall mount them, you can use Ethernet as well. The rear, how does it look? So you've got your mounting points at the back, speakers, Bluetooth, keypad at the bottom, your Wi-Fi bits, your microphone, It's really sort of well designed, these devices, so much so it's nice and sleek. It's very slim, very easy and lightweight to move as well. I have been asked a question how easy it's to tip over. I'll be brutally honest, I haven't tried tipping it over. I don't particularly want to try tipping it over because knowing my luck, I will tip it over. But the device itself, they've got design and upgrades in mind. Whereas the Gen 1 Surface Hubs was an all-in-one device, whereas this comes with a compute cartridge and module that you can take out. So if there is at some point an upgrade available to the Surface Hubs, okay, and they release a new module, whether that's an upgraded processor or anything like that, okay, you can then potentially buy the compute module rather than the full screen and the full device, and you just swap them out and away you go. The camera, so as I mentioned, it's a 4K camera. It's got a 90-degree field of angle. 90-degree field of view, sorry. Really good speakers, really good sound quality. Good microphone, supports beamforming. Okay, and this is the battery, so it fits in a nice little tray underneath here, the Surface Hub, so it does fit in the tray underneath, and it will fit in there, and you can just, there's a little cable run just at the side here, you can plug it into the back and away you go. And there's a little animation to see how that fits. So the pen itself, you get one pen with it. It's a really good pen where you can use as a right click. You've got indicators on it. Oh no, this one doesn't have an LED on it. I learned something new. It's got a eraser and top button, so again you can just turn it around. You can draw on one side, you can flick it around and erase on another, and if you push a little button on the side, you can use that to select things as well. The Windows 10 recently, the Windows 10 Team 2020 update was recently released at the end of last year for Gen 2 Surface Hubs. It was recently, it was released in January for Gen 1 Surface Hubs as a bare metal restore update, with the over-the-air update coming to the Gen 1 Surface Hubs end of February, mid-February, in the February sort of time. The benefits of having the latest version of iOS, there's enhanced single sign-on, conditional support, modern authentication, so it depreciates basic auth, which is great for the security nuts out there that really push on security. Coordinated join with Microsoft Teams rooms, proximity join with Microsoft Teams rooms as well. You can set Microsoft Teams as the default calling app. You couldn't do that on the previous OS. It had to be Skype for Business first. Dual pen inking, so if you had two pens, or if you use, as that video alluded to, the Surface Pro X pen would work. And you can use FIDO passwordless authentication if you've got one of the little USB keys as well. If, however, you employ these devices in some of the C-levels, CIO, CTO, large office sort of organizations and methods, you can install a flat version of Windows Pro and Windows Enterprise where it's just Windows 10. You do have to do some work to the BIOS to allow it to install. And once it's installed, it is essentially just a Windows 10 machine. You can enroll it into Intune. However, one of the recommendations is it's only got a small hard drive. You take away that collaboration aspect because you can't really let multiple people log into this device, and you'll see what I mean when we go through a bit of a demo. With authentication, again, you've got a fingerprint reader. A fingerprint reader allows you to use your fingerprint to sign in, but that's only in the Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise installation of the OS. Authenticator app. Shabazz has done a really good sort of session on how to configure passwordless authentication using the Authenticator app, the Microsoft Authenticator app. And you've got good old-fashioned username and password if that is what you need. So we've talked about the licenses, we've talked about Surface Hub, we've talked about what a meeting room device is, but actually, again, what is it? Fortunately, I don't have one to hand to show you. However, they're easy to use. Okay, they work like you are in one place. Again, it's the same look and feel as what Teams, the app, already has. there's a device for every space and working style, depending on what kind of area you are. And this all comes down to your persona management, how you describe a room. If you've got an organization that's got 100 rooms, and you might have 5 small rooms, 10 medium rooms, 30 large rooms or whatever, you break them down into personas. So the same bit of kit goes in them same rooms, and it makes it easier from a management perspective as well. And also, you know what you're procuring and stuff going forward. An example, what we would do for small, well, for medium actually, or large, not so much small, is the G40T. It's a Polycom device where you get this Windows 10 it's a little Lenovo ThinkSmart Edition PC, and that goes on a Visa mount behind a TV. You've got this little touchscreen display in the middle, and you've got a Polycom Studio or Poly Studio soundbar with camera, microphone, Bluetooth as well that can control that kind of thing, the video and audio. You can join Zoom and WebEx meetings from an MTR if you do the configuration for Teams. Or also allow it through Exchange Online, because you've got to just be careful that sometimes you have to configure some of your Exchange policies just to leave the text in there unaltered. So it allows so the MTR can pick it up that it is a Zoom or WebEx meeting, and it's quite easy to finish it. This is a screenshot that I've nicked off a previous slide deck from Microsoft, and you can see that it does say Zoom and WebEx as different types of meetings. If you've got dual monitors, for example, on your MTR device, on your Microsoft Teams Room device, dual monitors, you'll have your content on one and your video feeds on another. If you to join a Zoom or WebEx meeting, unfortunately, you lose that dual screen experience because it opens it up in the web browser using WebRTC rather than the standard Teams protocols. So, understanding the different types of meeting spaces. And what could you put in there? So again, you've kind of got to break these spaces up. And again, this all depends on how inclusive you want these rooms to be. Is there going to be many people working from home? Are they going to be videoing in? Do you need to take acoustics into consideration? Do you need more than one person in there? Do you need 3 people in there? Do you need 10 people in there? Now, a lot of organizations are going to do a lot of work over the next couple of months of saying, right, well, this used to hold 10 people. If we applied the common sense now of a bit of social distance, and this, that, the other, how many people realistically can we fit in these rooms now? And they might have to redesign them rooms and the equipment that goes in the rooms if they're going to change what's currently there. So phone booths, okay, I have seen organizations, and we are speaking to an organization at the moment, have actually gone out and bought some phone booths, old school bred phone boxes, okay, for their privacy in some of their collaboration areas. And now, it goes without saying, that's one person in there. We've all seen the video clip where everyone tries to squeeze in one, but one person in there with a Teams-enabled phone set up as a common area phone, so they can have a private conversation that might already be in a large collaboration area. So your huddle spaces. So kind of like I've got now, we've got a couple of banks of desks, and I've brought the service hub over and I'm using it as a collaboration sort of huddle space. I've just realised, let me change that. Your small, so your focus rooms, so your small sort of three people sort of rooms, and you kind of go up in size. Okay, but it all depends on the size of your room. I might say as a small, you might say as a medium. It all depends on how many people you want to put in them rooms and how you classify that room. And it all depends then what kind of equipment you would put in that room. So there are some rough guidelines from Microsoft on what kind of kit you'd put in or per sort of people or dimensions within a room. So a large office, again, so we're talking about a Surface Hub as a someone's toy, CEO, CTO, CIO, C-level, senior management, having a Surface Hub running just Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise. Okay, you could have that in there on the wall or on the stand for them to play with, next to their desk, next to their conference table, in their own little office. So I said, Shabazz, give me a 5-minute warning. You could set up a Teams collaboration bar if they do so wish. But again, it depends if you're going to collaborate or if you're just going to present. So focus room, 3 to 5 people. Okay, again, are you going to meet and present, or are you going to meet and co-create? And that will again depend if you're going to have a Surface Hub or a Teams collaboration bar. You don't have to have a Surface Hub. Okay, you can get devices touch-enabled screens, and you could plug an Android in there, an Android collaboration bar in there, and kind of get a similar sort of feel and approach as well. Open collaboration spaces, perfect for Wheels. In fact, there's a bit of me doodling from the last time I gave this presentation as well. So you can add the wheels to it and the stand, and you can push that around, and it doesn't have to sit there. You can also have a screen at the back. Bring your own device. You don't have to invest in Teams rooms equipment to get the best out of these areas. If you wanted, you just put a bring your own device sort of policy in place where you've got a meeting area and all that's there is a HDMI lead, and you can plug in your screen and away you go. Small conference room, 5 to 7 people. Meet and present. 2 screens, maybe an Android collaboration bar, just to get that real inclusive. You've got everyone, you can see everybody in the meeting. They're not tucked away at the bottom. You've got that full screen dedicated to video feeds. Or if you wanted, you could have an 85-inch Surface Hub. I wish I could have an 85-inch Surface Hub, I'll be honest, but I'll just have to put one with my 50-inch instead. So medium conference room. So as we start getting bigger, the more and more tech that you can incorporate into that space. Again, this is roughly 11 people. But in the modern world, are you going to put 11 people in a meeting room? That's up for your company to decide. That's up for people to discuss. Are you going to feel comfortable as a person standing in a room with 11 people? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how we are with vaccination rollouts and all that kind of stuff. It all depends on what country you're in, of course. Some countries have got on more than others, and I know in some of our offices in Denmark, all the meeting rooms are shut, whereas we still have a small set of meeting rooms here where we will allow 2 people. In what used to be a 4 or 5 person room, we've got 2 people. So there's ways that you can really sort of use them spaces, even if you just want to use it as a quick calling area. Large conference rooms, 18 plus people. Again, all depends on your perception of large and how many people you want to put in there. Again, you could use a dual display Microsoft Teams room, or a Surface Hub stuck on the side of the wall, 50-inch again, or 85-inch. But you could use a projector, an MTR device with a projector on a screen rather than two screen displays, okay, or just a Microsoft Teams room. And depending on the layout, if you've got like workbench scenario, you could have that 85-inch there on the wall as well. These are just suggestions from Microsoft based on sort of what they've seen. If you're going to go extra large auditorium sort of level space, you can with Microsoft. There are some supported devices now that allow you to have meeting or ceiling tiles replaced with some audio capture with some microphones and speakers as well. You could use so this looks like it's a Poly Director 2 camera maybe. So there's 2 cameras in there, fully supported with speaker tracking or active tracking. So if one person speaks and another person speaks, one camera still focuses on one and the other zooms to another. Again, making people more inclusive, so everybody who's remote can see everyone in the room, and vice versa. Everyone who's on the room can see everybody who's in the meeting working from home remotely. That is it. That's my presentation. I would have liked to demo an MTR and a bit of coordinated join. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that for this session, so maybe next time. Shabazz, I'll hand over back to you, mate.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for the demo. Great session.
Thank you.
We've got no questions in the chat, so I'll open up to anybody if they've got any questions for Sam.
Hey! I've got one here. If that's all right, it's Luke. Give me 1 second. I found a very interesting article on Teams room devices the other day that I was wondering if you had a chance to play with. Basically, you can roll your own Teams meeting room device using like an Intel NUC, a Surface device, and a camera. Because I'll be honest, I tried to purchase a Teams meeting room device for about 700 quid. It was obviously stolen or what would I say? What's the word I'm looking for? Repurposed from someone's office. So I was trying to buy it from a gentleman in the US, and $700 didn't swing it. So I've been waiting to play with the Teams meeting room device, but I don't know if you had a chance to play with it. just
Was
yet.
that a Logitech Smart Dock by any chance?
It wasn't. That was a Lenovo one. That one, and he
Okay.
said it was from a meeting refurb. But I saw this one earlier. I think I saw it. Yeah, it's about 8 days old. This article, and it was
Okay.
very interesting to me. So I'll paste it in the chat. But that one is you can roll your own basically Teams meeting room device. So you don't have to go spend the money, which I thought was very interesting. And I was just wondering if you had a chance to play with it yet.
I mean, that would be great for proof of concept or testing. Microsoft have a device certification program, and they will turn around and say, we support the Teams solution if the device is certified.
It's all right. No, I wasn't looking for it then to certify myself. It was more, if I'm an aspiring Teams room guy, how do I play with this stuff? It's probably
Well, that said, you can also, if you've got VMware Workstation, there's a really good article, a couple of articles out there. I'll see if I'll probably dig it out while the speaker's presenting, where you can actually install, and in fact, I will show you my. I start my VM. So I've installed Windows 1909 because that's the supported version with the MTR at the moment. And I've done a cheat recovery of the MTR where it's thought it's an MTR and it's installed the MTR program. And I essentially have tricked a virtual machine into thinking that it's a Microsoft Teams room device. It's installed Teams, and you can then use, if you use VMware, you can give it multiple screens and you can trick it into thinking that if you wanted to play and test and trial things that way.
Cool. Very nice. Yeah. So I think it probably is the same thing that they're doing with they basically force it via Teams meeting room device, but with actual hardware. So it was an interesting one to me. But thanks for the take.
I'll have a read. Thank you.
Yeah, he just said it to me. I was going to have a play around, and I've got a little Surface Go that I don't really use. So I was thinking if I could set that up for my home office, I don't need it to be certified, but it could be quite a. I just like gadgets. It could be quite a nice little gadget to have in the office.
That's it. I mean, I've tried buying a couple of these things, and I had no joy. Was the problem. So I'm looking for these ones that are obviously been lifted from an office or something.
Granted, they're not cheap. If you go down the actual certification process and the route, they're not cheap. You could be looking for, even for the collaboration bars for the Poly X30, X50, for example, you could be looking upward of £2,000 just for the device. Then you got the license fee on top of that. It's not cheap, but it's that investment and that organisations will go through. Hence, I've found a way of butchering a VM, and always think that is the case as well. But I'm also lucky that as a net company, we've got partnerships, and we've got people who can send us kit to play with.
I think for me, one of the things that one of the things that excites me most about the Teams room is as we look to people coming back into the office and having this hybrid workforce. I think we're going to start to have real problems with Teams meetings. I mean, I'm sure you all remember what it was like before we went into lockdown. If you were the one person at home and there were 10 people in the office having a meeting, you weren't going to get a word in edgeways. So, I think the ability for the proper Teams room devices to be able to support a more inclusive meeting, I think, and provide that kind of hybrid integration, I think that it's something organisations should absolutely be looking to rework their office space to include stuff like this.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll just if I just share my screen very quickly. So this is a VM that I'm currently running, and it's my conference room Fanta. It's called Fanta because I had run out of imagination and I had an empty can of Fanta on my desk. This was set up for a demo that we did earlier today. I put it in full screen, and then in VMware you can turn around and say, right, well, I have 3 monitors here. I've got my laptop and 2 screens. And I'll trick the VM in saying, VMware, this is my other monitor. And then I've got my monitor and my virtual machine MTR. And then you can book it because it's set up with an account, and you can manage it and maintain it like it is a physical MTR. So if it's something just to play with, then I'll find the articles and I'll stick it in this chat so people can play with.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Sam, there's a question from Chris about the maximum number of monitors in the chat. I don't know if you've seen that.
So if you've got so the answer is 2 officially. So most MTR devices will support 2 devices, 2 screens. That said, if them 4 screens that you've put there are behind some sort of media encoder to making perceptions one big screen, then that could possibly work. It's not something I've tested, but I can't see a reason why that wouldn't work if they were presented as one screen to the device. So that's a potential.
If there's no more questions, if you can all come off mute and give Sam a round of applause.
Oh, cool.
Thank you very much.
So for our second session tonight, I'll hand over to Zoe Wilson and Luke Evans. That's okay?
Awesome.
That's cool.
I was just going to say, did you mean to have your hand up, Luke?
No, I was trying to spam the applause, but I was too eager. You know, it was problematic.
I thought you were doing like a high five.
All right, give me just a second, guys, and I'll set this one up.
All right, you're driving, aren't you?
I am. Yeah, give me just a moment. Sorry, and I'll beam something up for us. So I'm going to just share my screen one, and let's go for it. And then just let me know when you can see. Is probably the important one.
Yeah.
See your screen now.
All right, wonderful. All right, so we'll get into it, but I'm going to kick things off briefly. And me and Zoe Wilson here today to talk about usability versus security in Microsoft Teams. A very brief introduction about myself. You know, you can tell that the lockdown's hit me hard with this photo. But what I was going to say is I'm a technical architect. For my sins, I did about 6 years at Microsoft in SharePoint. So that's kind of my background. I have a real kind of focus on kind of identity, security, teams and kind of collaboration. So that is kind of my remit, and you know, a technical architect. So I'm involved in kind of the setup of these things, the build out of them, and you know, I'm just very all in on Teams is what I would say.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Luke. So I'm Zoe Wilson. As you can tell from the accent, I'm actually from Yorkshire. I grew up just down the road from Bradford. So speaking at this user group is a good thing for me. So I'm the Director of Innovation and Customer Success at Agilysys. I've worked with Luke for about the last 4 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I've worked with SharePoint and collaborative technologies for about 15 years. I've got 5 years experience of growing, managing and leading technical teams. I speak at loads of events. I talk a lot about accessibility, so I get really excited about accessibility in Microsoft 365. You know, I think it's something that we should all care about. I talk a lot about Teams as well, and various other bits and bobs. I help schools with like careers advice around digital careers. I'm an active women in tech advocate. And generally just like to make my voice heard, I'd say. Now, the other thing I'd add as well, I know Sam got the news that he was speaking at Converse just before the call. Luke and I both got that same news as well, so we'll see you there, Sam.
Happy
Very
days.
exciting.
Happy days.
Yeah, and one last thing as well, you know, if you want to follow me on Twitter, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, my details are on the screen. You know, I'm always happy to connect and hear what other people are up to as well. All right, so what are we going to talk to you about today? So like Luke said, we're looking at Microsoft Teams and usability versus security. Now, before we dive in, what I would say is that this is some new content that we've been pulling together. So this is the first time that we've actually given it a test run out. So, you know, feedback's welcomed. And if it seems a little bit rusty, then just bear with us. You know, we're wanting to kind of get a really good session together. But we do hope you enjoy it, and we look forward to any questions at the end as well. Now, we're going to start off looking at the user perspective. So what are some of the key use cases for Microsoft Teams? You know, how do I want to work as an end user, and what are some of the risks that introduces? And then we'll look at responsibilities as well. So where does Microsoft's responsibility for security end, and where does yours begin? And then Luke, who's obviously the technical hero on the call, he's going to take us through some of the technical components that we'd configure and how that can help keep the usability that we want intact as well. And then we're just going to finish off with a little bit of a summary and some recommendations and any questions. And please pop questions in the chat as we go as well. And, you know, we'll hopefully have a bit of a chat at the end.
Oh, gosh. There we go.
All right, so let's have a look at Microsoft Teams today. Now, Microsoft Teams is only 4 years old. I think it's like, what, 4 years and a month since it was launched. And the increase in usage stats have been quite staggering, really. So in 2020, Microsoft added 95 million users, which is just absolutely phenomenal. From March to June 2020 last year, so when we first went into lockdown, there was almost a 900% growth in Teams usage as everybody just kind of threw it out and went to work from home. At Microsoft Ignite a few weeks ago, they announced that 30 billion collaboration minutes are taking place every day, which again, these numbers are just absolutely staggering. We've got over 500,000 organisations using Teams. We've got 145 million daily active users. So that's 145 million people who are logging into Teams every day to do their work or for their education, which again is just staggering. And a study of US Teams users in 2020 found that 30% of companies use Microsoft Teams for remote work during the pandemic. So, when we're talking about Microsoft Teams, it's, these are big numbers. It's in use everywhere. It's an enormous part of our working day. And, again, just thinking about kind of what's happened over the last year, what I've seen with a lot of people that we talk to is that Teams was just thrown out, without much thought given to that security. And that's, some of the issues that poses is what we'll take you through today. So if we look at striking the balance between usability and security, I think historically often these two things were opposite to each other. So effective security came at the expense of usability, and usability came at the expense of security. And many people continue to go by the notion that there's no way to achieve both of these things together, that it just doesn't work. And if you look at the chart that we've got on screen, where we want to be is this green box on the top right. So ideally what we want is to have high security in place so that people, content, the organisation is protected. But we also want that improved usability as well. We want people to be able to do their jobs without running into barriers and without trying to find workarounds that let them kind of share and collaborate in the way that they need to. I think, like I said, what we've seen with Teams is that, where organisations have just thrown Teams over the fence to get it out and to allow people to work remotely, what we've ended up with is kind of this top yellow box where we've got improved usability. So people have got all of the Teams features, they can kind of work and collaborate, but the security isn't there. They don't have the right governance in place, and we have talked to quite a few customers this year where they've openly admitted that they threw Teams out, and now they're in a bit of a mess because they don't really know kind of what their external sharing rules are. They've got loads of Teams, they don't know what they're for, and this is a bit of a nightmare, I think.
And I think, just sorry to interrupt there, Zoe, but I think the one for me that always has been apparent, if we lock it down too heavily, if we go for high security and we kind of decrease the usability of the solution, users will likely go somewhere else. So they will typically find another way to do it, is the thing. So that's why we want to try to avoid that. We want it to be as smooth as possible, because if it's a good user experience and the users don't notice the security, they're going to continue using it, is what I would say. So the key really for me is we want to be in that top right hand box, and we want it to be usable, but also have that underlying security behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like to use the phrase governance guardrails. I think what we want is those governance guardrails in place that are invisible to the user, but they keep them on the straight and narrow. They keep them going in that safe path that we want them to. And if we have a look at what users need, so as a user, what are the types of key use cases that I have, and there's tons of them. We're not going to go through all of them. But what we wanted to do was to just pull out some of the most common scenarios so that we can look at how we secure those. So I think the last year has shown that users need to be able to work from anywhere. And actually, it's not just about working from anywhere, it's also working on any device as well. So when the whole world shifted to remote work, we saw a few things happen. There were huge device shortages worldwide, so people were having to connect to Office apps like Teams using mobiles or crappy tablets or old laptops. I've got kind of friends and family who were saying some of their kids school friends in the same class were, using their phone to join Teams classes because they didn't have a device to do it. And again, if you think back to kind of when we were in the office, if your laptop broke, it was relatively easy to get hold of a spare. But suddenly, we were in this scenario where someone's device could break and you couldn't even order, the kit to replace it. So, people need to be able to work from anywhere and any device. I need to be able to work from home. I need to be able to work on the move, or when we're allowed again back in the office as well. I need to be able to work from my bed or my kitchen table or my desk or hiding in the bathroom because the kids are crying, wherever it is. I need that flexibility. So that's a really key consideration. As an end user as well, I also need confidence that only the right people have access to the stuff that I'm working on, so that I can collaborate safely and securely. Now, it doesn't matter whether these are my internal colleagues in an internal team or a chat, or with external partners in an external facing team. It doesn't matter whether it's me working and collaborating with someone in a Teams meeting or a chat, or whether they're invited into a team as a fully fledged guest in my environment, but ultimately what I need is that confidence in who has access to my stuff. And lastly, when I think about my data as well and the stuff that I produce, it needs to be protected. And ideally, it needs to be protected for me, not by me. So this means that I need my IT admins ideally to have set up all the right config and all the right controls to allow me to be able to work with people securely without me having to think about it. I'm not a records manager. I don't know, as an end user, I don't know what the different retention rules are. I don't know what sensitivity rules apply to my stuff. Ideally, I just want to be able to work in a team with my colleagues or partners or whoever, and automatically have my data protected for me. And then if we just think about this, so on the flip side, just some of the admin thoughts. So when we're looking at some of these use cases, from an admin's perspective, how does an admin ensure governance around groups, which ultimately is the thing that underpins a team? Should we as an admin, should we be enabling self-service? How do we manage groups at scale? There's a lot of complexity, I think, that starts to be introduced when you start to pull some of this apart. Okay, so then we start to look at responsibility. So whose responsibility is security? And I think, one of the things I've typically seen with customers is that they think, when everything's on-prem, they kind of, they have everything protected and all the security stuff in place. But then when you move to the cloud, they just think, well, it's Microsoft problem now. And if we just use an analogy to kind of explain this, imagine if you're driving on a long dark road on a rainy night, and you're driving 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, and you don't step on the brakes when the car in front of you comes to a sudden stop. Is it your fault, or is it your car manufacturer's fault if you rear-end the car that is in front of you? And when we're driving a car, we just understand, we just know that there are some things that the manufacturer do from a safety perspective, so they give us brakes that work, they give us airbags that deploy. And some things that we're responsible for is the driver of that car. So using the brakes when needed, or making sure we don't turn off the airbag. And I think this is just a really useful way to kind of understand, the responsibility for security is shared. There are tools and features that Microsoft give to us, but then actually configuring them in a way that works for us is something that we have to be responsible for as an organisation.
And Luke, stepping in here, I think we can see quite a transition from the on-prem, where you can see all the blue boxes on the right-hand side, which is kind of the customer's responsibility, to kind of SaaS offerings, which is Microsoft 365. And the key ones that we really want to call out are on the left, which is kind of the data classification, data accountability. We want to look at identity and access management, and also the devices that kind of consume those SaaS services. And kind of the technologies that I want to look at in a bit really are kind of focused on those key areas. The key ones for me is kind of data classification, identity and access management, and kind of endpoint devices when we're talking about, securing teams and ensuring kind of usability. I think the thing that I want to talk about first and foremost was kind of the architecture of teams. Now, again, before I get into the kind of preamble about the technical nature of things, I would usually say, look, I'm a techie at heart. I'm not entirely sure of the level that everyone's at the room, so I'm kind of pitching it probably at a lower level, not highly in depth. But again, like Zoe said, if you have any questions, please feel free to stick them in the chat. We'll be happy to look at them and answer them as we go through. I think the other thing I was going to call out is I'm a techie at heart. I tend to talk very quickly, is the thing when I get quite excited about technology. So if I go too quick, I try to pace out, is the other thing I would say. But if I do talk too quick, then please shout and just let us know. But I think the first thing I wanted to talk about really when it comes to securing teams is kind of we need to understand the components that make it up. Now, for me, the key ones when we talk about securing teams are really going to be the identity piece, or the identity plane, which is Azure Active Directory, and that's one of the key ones. But the other key ones that you might not know when you're dealing with this sort of stuff is really the things that underpin it. So you've got basically OneNote, we have the Office Web App Companions, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, Exchange. We have the public Skype network. So when Microsoft acquired Skype a number of years ago, they actually make use of the public Skype network now. And on top of that, kind of we have the Exchange side of things for email as well. The other thing I wanted to call out is kind of the way that we access Teams, and that's kind of the clients along the top. So we have web, desktop, iOS, Android, and we can also access it through APIs. I think the key thing here is we're talking about identity, we're talking about client to the client, and we're also talking about kind of the storage where these files live and how we kind of classify and protect that data. Now, what I've got in the next couple of slides are really kind of technology areas, what we typically do, and Zoe's probably going to interject here and there with some questions along the way in terms of how it might work in terms of usability. I'm going to talk through the technology and some key recommendations that I would typically recommend in terms of helping to ensure a secure and usable platform is the thing. Now, my heart really lies in kind of Azure AD, and which we saw on the right hand side here. This is kind of the identity control plane for Microsoft Teams. And Azure AD has a whole heap of features that we can use to better control kind of how we access Microsoft Teams. And I'm going to just step through some of them now. So the first one that I would recommend to everyone that kind of is working with this technology is really conditional access. And conditional access, or Azure AD conditional access, is really around kind of the who, what, why, when, where, how I can access my data is the key. And what we've kind of got here is just a high-level representation of kind of the process flow and how it might work. And I'll step into kind of some scenarios a bit later of how it might work and some recommendations. But for me, it's the simple if this then what happens, in terms of how I access my data. On the left, we kind of have a user. We can evaluate a whole bunch of different conditions when they go to access or authenticate against Microsoft Teams. And this is purely around the user identity. We're not talking about authorization, where what teams you have access to. It does take that into consideration, but here is just authentication and how we want to get onto the platform. And what we can see here is we can take in, where they're coming from, and location is a key one. Typically, in the old days, you might want to restrict this to kind of specific network ranges. Now, I wouldn't really go that way in this day and age, but I'll talk through what I'll do a bit later in terms of recommendation. The other really interesting one that I like and I favor a great deal is kind of the device state, and we can use Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Microsoft Intune to basically understand what is the compliance of that device. Do we know if it's a known device? Is it registered? Has it got antivirus running? And we can take a whole bunch of different conditions into the evaluation of whether we can, grant or deny access to Teams on that. We can also take in the user group or type, and also, and we'll talk about it a bit later, but this is kind of this is a higher one, but we can take into an account the risk of a user sign-in, which is pretty darn cool as well. But what Azure AD conditional access will do is basically evaluate all these conditions, and based upon them, it's going to basically either allow or deny access. And if we do kind of grant access to Teams in this scenario, we might enforce MFA, we might apply session controls depending on the device that they're coming from. Now, I did touch upon risk, and I should say as well that I have kind of catered for E3 and E5, but I will call out specifically when we are going to use higher tiered features within kind of Microsoft 365. The next one that I wanted to call out, and they kind of all feed together into the identity piece, which is the first one about, I want to ensure, I want to make sure that the right people have access and we're only allowing those people in. And it also is catering for that. I want to work from kind of wherever I want to work. And that's really where this is strengths come in. The next component is that kind of risk-based sign-in, and that's really done by identity protection. So Microsoft has a whole heap of people authenticating. They analyze over 6.5 trillion signals a day to kind of identify and protect customers. So you can use machine learning and big data at scale to better understand what does a sign-in or a risky sign-in look like. So it can automatically apply a risk level to each sign-in that comes along. And these kind of risk signals, as it were, so we can have a low, medium, or high, we can take those in conditional access or Azure Sentinel and basically use them to perform further actions. So we can basically block access, we could trigger further remediation, maybe prompt a user to change their password or enforce MFA. That's kind of where this comes in. Now, identity protection is an Azure AD Premium P2, but if you have that available, or an E5 in that case, or SCP, or EMS E5, we can make use of this. And the key things it's kind of picking up as are anonymous IP addresses. So if you're coming over a Tor network, if you're signing in from kind of a place that you're not, you're signing in from a new device platform, signing in from a new browser, it can take that into consideration. If you've been flagged as a malware linked IP address, if you are traveling, if you're trying to sign in from the US and you always sign in the UK, it can automatically evaluate that as a risk condition. If a user's getting password spray attacked or your credentials have been leaked somewhere else, it can take all these into consideration and build that risk profile, and it can automatically apply that into conditional access. Now, what does that look like in a real world one? We have this kind of scenario here. And basically, again, oh, sorry, I was a bit too trigger happy there. Again, what it's looking at is the same scenario that we saw a moment ago, but what we're going to have is the location is good, the device state is good, we know this device, there's a user, it's in the right groups to access this, but we've kind of marked it as a high risk. And what that's going to do is basically block access and prompt for a password reset in this scenario. And the risk being high could be, any of these conditions that we saw on the previous page. So it may be that they have some atypical travel. So they might usually sign in from UK and they've suddenly got an authentication request from China, and basically it would automatically block that request. So that's really supporting that use case of kind of how do we basically allow people to work from wherever. Now, I do realize this piece that I've called out here specifically E5, so I did want to take through some E3 recommendations that I would probably recommend to do kind of immediately if you don't already. So most of the ones here are going to be Azure AD Premium P1, but what I'd recommend is if you don't have that, you can still use the security defaults, which are enabled on each and every tenant, and they're basically some sensible defaults that Microsoft have put in place after a period of time to basically enforce MFA. It's going to enforce it for users, admins. I think it also basically blocks legacy auth, and I can't quite remember the fourth one of the security defaults. But they are a good baseline setting is what I would say, but it doesn't allow you that fine-tuned granularity of exactly how you want users to access kind of Azure AD or to authenticate to it. Now, if you do have Azure AD Premium P1, I think the key things I would typically recommend basically is to first enable MFA. If you're not doing that, then Lord help you is the thing in this day and age. The stat that I've got is 99.9% of account or attacks could basically be prevented by using MFA, and we can make it incredibly easy using kind of the Microsoft Authenticator. The other key one, and again, I would hope most people have this one already done, is disable legacy auth. So we have kind of two different sign-ins. We have modern auth, legacy auth. Modern auth is an interactive sign-in protocol, so we can prompt for additional factors of authentication, whereas legacy auth is a simple username and password. So we can basically, you can spam that quite heavily. Certainly on, I've seen Exchange attacks that basically make use of the legacy auth. The other key one that I like, and it's a very easy one to get going with, is we can make use of kind of country lists, and we can basically allow or block countries quite easily using this. So typically what I'd recommend is if, certainly for the local authorities or public sector clients I've been working with, if they're not working outside of the UK, why bother with kind of sign-ins from outside of the UK? Typically, I would recommend either, allowing one country, or the other approach you can take is to block the known kind of bad actors. So typically I would always block China, North Korea, Iran, and I'm trying to think who the last one is, Russia. Those ones are typically the ones we do. And I think that's also, I pulled that one from the National Cybersecurity Center. So that's the recommendation at that level. And I would recommend just blocking authentication attempts from them, unless you have a user that that's coming in. The final one that I like, and this is really the key for supporting that kind of work anywhere, work anytime, is really around kind of device-driven controls. So it's that in-tune kind of piece, which is device compliance, device registration. So it doesn't matter where in the world I'm coming from, as long as my device is compliant, whether it's a mobile device, whether it's a Windows 10 device. The key thing is that we can allow access because we trust and know that device and the health of that device. I think the other one in terms of that is if you are working on a BYOD scenario, you're working with guests and you are working with unmanaged devices, we can use Azure AD conditional access and specifically the session controls to prevent downloads on unmanaged devices is the one. Now, I realize I did whip through conditional access, but that is certainly one of my favorites. And these are the kind of takeaways that I would probably put there in terms of if you wanted to do anything today, I would probably do these top 4 is the one.
Yeah, so just thinking, Luke, you know, if we, these are the features that will help support our user requirements to be able to work from anywhere. But if we think more specifically about the organisations who threw Teams out a year ago with little on governance, what, you know, if we now go and deploy identity protection and risk-based conditional access for those organisations, what is the impact that's going to have on, you know, Joe Blogs as a user?
It's a great question, and everyone on the call, Zoe is kind of pop quizzing me here, so I haven't had a chance to think these through. This is off the cuff, so let's see how I do is what I would say. I think in terms of the user perception, how it's going to affect Joe Blogs, I'm hopeful the impact would be minimal is the nice thing. If you're using device-driven controls, you know, you are basically using identity protection, you know, we shouldn't really see a great deal of impact for a user is the nice thing, as long as their account hasn't been compromised is the thing. If they're signing from a familiar location, familiar device, you know, it's not leaked credentials or anything like that, the end user shouldn't really see any difference is the thing. So it should really have no impact. What is really going to be helpful is kind of preventing those attacks and increasing the security posture of your organization. So Joe Blogs, it shouldn't really have much of an impact from clients that I've seen using this. You know, I've actually seen it been rather successful. So I've worked recently. Oh, sorry.
So I recently had this deployed internally, and I think where I ran into a problem was I hit the device limit. So I had like 5 known devices, and when I went to try and register it with I think my personal phone, which I use more than my work phone, it was saying no. Computer says no.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think you're a special case in that case. Sorry, I'm not sure how many users we're going to have with 5 devices in that scenario, but it is noted you could increase the limit in endpoint manager to allow users to have more devices, but typically in that scenario you might want to put some comms out that's, you know, if you are a heavy user of multiple devices in a BYOD scenario, you can quite easily manage that, I believe, from the Microsoft sign-in portal is the thing. So you can go and manage your devices and end user prior to any sort of rollout. So it might be just a comms piece if that is a scenario.
Perfect. All right. So we do have one question in the chat as well.
I'll
so
go for it, please.
The one pop quizzing you. Now, Chris says, allowing and blocking countries, will this detect if a VPN is in use? For example, if someone in China uses a VPN to connect to a UK server, would it detect?
It's a good question, and you're spot on. No, it would not. So it will basically only really works on kind of geo IP tables. So we, you know, I think it's like the Maxmine Lite 2 dB or something like that. They maintain lists of these are the known IP ranges for any given country. So you can VPN around it, and that's again why you probably want to make use of MFA and device controls. So the conditional access rules that I typically recommend are kind of defense in depth. They're layered, so they can quite easily circumvent that one. And for anyone else that is interested, you can quite easily circumvent a number of things here, kind of using user agent spoofing. It's not entirely that clever when it comes to things like that, but when you are starting to basically layer these things on, it's very tricky for someone to get around all the different controls you can put in place. So thank you for the question is what I would say, but no, it can detect the VPN. Cool. The next one I want to talk about again is Azure AD. And again, this is a nice easy one, but again, this is supporting that final use case that we saw on the bottom right, if I remember correctly, which was, again, is kind of, I only want the people to have access that need to have access at any given point in time. Again, this is an AAD Premium P2, EMS, E5, but I can strongly recommend access reviews. And these are kind of really a way of putting the ownership of kind of membership of teams onto kind of end users. It's not an IT administration task. It's not something you guys want to be doing. We want to basically have people self-reviewing their groups or putting it on managers or nominated individuals, and this can really help basically cut down on superfluous individuals that shouldn't be in teams anymore. Again, the really cool thing that I would recommend here is that basically the system can make usage or can make recommendations based on usage within a group. So it basically can suggest who it thinks should remain in a group or in a team and basically propose those changes to you, which again to me is awesome. So it can provide you a list at the end and say, these are the people that we suggest keeping in the group. And again, that really helps in terms of the usability, because we can schedule these, we can run them. If you have to basically go through it each and every time and kind of choose, who should be in a group and who shouldn't, it can become rather tedious. So I really like that recommendations one. And this is kind of just a small kind of process flow on there. So we can have that running in the background. In terms of a recommendation, if you can get that in earlier, probably the better, is what I would say when you're rolling out teams. Ideally, now again, I realize that horse is bolted quite for a number of us out there. But again, another very useful technology in terms of helping to increase the security posture of your organization while trying to make it fairly usable. People aren't going through manually combing out kind of entities. It's more about the system providing recommendations based on usage and basically auto applying them as long as it gets the okay from you, or you can have it automatically apply them if needed. I kind of layer up is the thing. So this is one about membership. The next one is kind of the step up from this. And again, another E5 one, unfortunately, but this one is very, very powerful. And, I haven't actually had a chance to really play with this one yet, but the concept is really quite fantastic is what I would say. The idea here is we have something called entitlement management. Yeah. And when a user joins an organization, certainly in this day and age, they're going to be SharePoint sites, there's going to be enterprise applications, there's going to be teams, there's going to be distribution lists, security groups. There's going to be a whole heap of kind of objects or securables that they quite often want to join. Now, what entitlement management does is basically bundle up these entities and provide them as a single access package that can be managed. Now, this is really powerful to me. I think, imagine you can bundle up everything for your HR department. You could bundle up everything for your IT department. All the sites that they need access to, all the teams, all the applications in Azure AD, and basically you can apply this to internal users, guest users. It doesn't really matter. We can basically put business owners in charge of these access packages, and again, what we can do is layer that access reviews technology we saw on the last slide, and basically have that apply on these access packages. So this stuff is super powerful. I can't wait to really get it out with a customer, is what I would say, because I think the ability to bundle all these applications in one single unit, apply an access review on top of that, is incredibly powerful. It's going to make life a lot easier to manage. And again, the one that really hits me is onboarding, offboarding, starters, movers, joiners, leavers. That whole thing, I think, is the one to kind of look at for this one.
Yeah, I think for me that's the bit that I get really excited about with this, and it's not even so much the starters and the leavers really, but the bit that when we talk to customers about this, the bit that they always find really hard to crack is that movers bit in the middle, because it's quite common for people to come into an organisation in one role and then maybe they move to another role in a different part of the organisation, and through the course of their employment they've got access to various things, they've got certain apps, and then when they move, how do you know what they need? So if it's as simple as saying, right, this person's not in HR anymore, they've moved to finance, and you take off the HR entitlement and give them the finance, it just takes care of it all. I think that to me is worth its weight in gold.
And I think just to add to that one, Zoe, the security aspect of this one for me is, and I know I'm guilty of this, but when you move about in an organization, you often end up with access to things that you might not necessarily want to let go of, and they can linger on a lot longer than needed. So again, that entitlement piece and managing these things as kind of units or packages is going to help increase the security again, because you're going to remove access kind of as a whole is the important thing. And again, internal or external, it doesn't really matter. We can monitor it and manage it the same way. And that's kind of and what I was going to say before I get into the next piece is I haven't chosen every technology under the sun that I could run through in terms of securing teams, because I haven't got cloud app security for an example today to run through. I thought I would choose probably the most relevant to the use cases and kind of tee those ones up. The next one's a really interesting one. That I want to talk briefly about Microsoft 365 groups, which kind of underpin teams. I haven't put the whole deck around Microsoft 365 groups and kind of what do they do. Suffice to say, that they are kind of the currency within Microsoft 365. It's a number of workloads brought together with a membership attached to them. The key one that we're really concerned with here today is teams. Now, the first one that we'd always look at, and again, I'm kind of open to this one, is kind of who can create teams, who can set them up, do we want to basically allow anyone to do it? How do we want that to work is the important thing. Now, for me, I'm fairly flexible. I think even if, what I'd always recommend, even if you don't want, even if you want users to be able to self-service groups, I would typically usually, change the kind of group settings or the group control settings, group creation settings within Azure AD and Microsoft 365 to basically restrict it to a group. The reason I would do this is I would typically put some sort of process in front of it to basically, apply some settings, best practice settings that we would normally do at any given point, even if it's self-approving and the user just fills out a Power App and it spins off a Power Automate and spins that up in the background. I feel like you can at least apply, guest settings that you might want to apply at that point of creation is the important thing. I think the other nice thing here is that with that kind of Power Automate, you can quite often supplement so if you don't have the high license queues, we can kind of make use of things and automate here at this point. So I think creation is an interesting one, and I think I would say it might not be suitable for all organizations. I feel like when it first came out, is really needed, but now we have more features that are coming along that I'll talk about slightly later. I think, I'm on the fence, but Zoe, I would probably go over to you on this one. You have quite a bit of experience in this one.
Yeah, so I think, self-serve's interesting, isn't it? Because when with Microsoft Teams, you don't really want to get in the way of helping people, quickly spin up a collaboration area. But I think for me, when you start to introduce things like guest access, if you turn guest access on and you let people self-serve, for me, you're just going to have an absolute nightmare. So coming back to my early point, as I was saying, as an end user, I want to be confident that only the right people have access to my content so that I can collaborate safely and securely. And, if I've got self-service on within Teams and we've got guest access on, I'm going to be nervous. If I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm going to be nervous about whether external people can see my stuff or not. And the other risk as well is, you'll inadvertently end up with someone who's shared like a super confidential internal only team with, someone that really shouldn't have been shared with. So, what we typically do recommend, like Luke said, is turning off that group creation, putting some form of process in front of it, whether it's, AvePoint Cloud Governance, whether it's our homegrown Power App with Power Automate. And when someone wants just to start a bog standard internal team, we don't have an approval workflow. We don't stand in the way of that being created. So they'll still get it within a few minutes. And we'll be able to start working straight away. But then when people want things that are a little bit riskier or they want to start sharing externally, we start to put some checks and balances in that, and we put some additional layers of governance in as well. So, it's just balancing that usability and security really, and making it easy for people to be able to work effectively, but also making sure that you're protecting them and the organization as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the last point as well is, the users shouldn't have to think about this. The users shouldn't be having to think hard about, what options and stuff they need to select. It's about those governance guardrails that just make it really easy for them to do the right thing.
And I think that's perfect, because that kind of leads me on to the next one, which is kind of guest access. And again, it leads to the user, they don't really care too much about, the complications behind the scenes. They want to be able to work with external parties, and we want to help facilitate that, but we also want to make sure it's done in a secure manner. So, guest access at Teams level, we use Azure B2B. One thing I would recommend, I think it might already be in place, I think it might be in May though, is that, and this is kind of an aside, I haven't put it on here, but I would obviously make use of the one-time passcode feature for any guest accounts is probably the first thing I would say when you're switching on guest access. I didn't cover it here, but the key thing is we can work with any email address. Azure B2B is great for federated accounts, and if you use that one-time passcode, it makes it very easy. The recommendations I would have, though, for enabling guest access are a few different things. So when we enable guest access, I would look to make use of a few different technologies to basically better govern it. So you can, again, use allow and block lists basically to control which domains users can invite people into. So, you might want to allow specific domains that you want to collaborate externally with and have into your teams. I think the other thing, you might want to block specific domains. So you might not, that you're not working with Hotmail or Gmail. You might want to rule them out, and you could basically add them to your block list. I think we can make use of the guest inviter role if you want to get a bit more specific and limit it to a set of users that you trust to invite in. I think, again, the other key ones that we touched upon previously is access review. And again, we can run specific access reviews on guests. And basically, I'll come to it a bit later, but sensitivity labels on Teams are awesome for guest access. And again, that helps me kind of lead away from a full-blown provisioning process. From my point of view, we can make use of sensitivity labels at the container level to help better control this. And again, you can make use of entitlement management to avoid repetition. Now, Zoe, I can't quite remember the name, but I'm pretty sure you'll know it is the thing. Soon enough, we're going to have, is it connected channels is the one? Or,
shared channels, was it?
Shared, I can't quite remember the feature name, but it's going to be awesome. So you can have a channel that's in, 2 tenants that you can work on together. And again, obviously we'd have to readdress that at this point in time, but this is what I'd probably recommend, is that we would typically enable guest access. You can control it at a team by team level if you have a provisioning process in place or a form of governance there. You can use the allow block list to basically control specific domains. We can basically use the guest inviter and then layer that on with the more premium features if you can, in terms of entitlement management to manage access to guest areas and access reviews to manage guest access longer term. Now, the final one is kind of an easy win, certainly in my point of view. It is kind of the final one. I have about 365 groups, and I like expiration policies. Simple as that they're very easy to get going with, in my humble opinion. An expiration policy is the following. A 365 group or a Microsoft team, you're using it, it's basically going to automatically check to see if you're still using that. If you're not using that team, it's going to basically fire off a notification, an email, to see if you want to prolong the usage of that team. And basically, if you don't respond, it's going to basically expire that group and delete it. Now, why is this useful from a security perspective? It basically means areas aren't open any longer than they need to be, is the key. So you don't want, areas open and access to users, whether that be internal or external, for any longer than they really need to be. Certainly from a GDPR perspective, when you're holding PII data, you should never really hold this stuff longer than absolutely necessary. So what would I say about expiration policy? I think what we typically do is pilot with specific groups. We would basically make sure that there's a comms that have gone out to basically ensure that users are aware of this change. And the thing is, people that use their teams constantly, it's not really going to affect them, because when they have an auto renewal, so it's going to check SharePoint site activity, mailbox activity, Teams chat messages to see if these areas are still being used. I think the only final one that we do before switching this on is make sure that you don't have orphan kind of teams or groups, and that you basically have multiple owners in place, and you also have an email for orphan groups to be caught. So if you do switch this on, then it will basically allow an email to go to maybe an information management team, information security team, whatever it may be. They're going to get a notification to say, hey, this group is basically rudderless or orphaned, and do we want to retain it? And that's kind of the 365 groups piece. The next one I wanted to talk about really is, that's kind of identity. Those are kind of the key identity themes from a technical perspective that I wanted to cover today. The next portion I really wanted to cover really is kind of the data that sits and resides in Teams. And there's a few different ways we can look to protect that. And let me run through some of them. So the first one I have is it's been around for quite some time, but we got sensitivity labels. It used to be Azure Information Protection, but it's really kind of, what is a sensitivity label? It's a tag, it's customizable, it's clear text, and it lives with the document itself. So it's persistent, it travels with the document, and it becomes the basis for applying and enforcing data protection policies. Now, the really cool thing is sensitivity labels can be applied at the document level, which they have been for some time. But the real key here is that basically they can now be applied at the container level as well. And we also can use double key encryption. It's an E5 feature which uses sensitivity labels to protect it, which is kind of just an add-on. But on the right-hand side, and I'm sure some of you guys have seen this, but you should hopefully, I'm hopeful some of you guys are making use of this, but you can see the classification engine here. Now, this might have well been, if you work with kind of if you work with public sector organizations, you might have seen this for some time. I've seen additional add-ons that they've had to use this to enable this, but it's very important. It's getting more prevalent. They baked it into the client, and this protects documents at a document level. Now, what does that mean? It means that documents can basically, if you apply the sensitivity label, It can protect a document with encryption. It can expire access to it. It can watermark it. It can label it. It can do a whole bunch of kind of protective activity to that document and apply those data protection policies. Now, the great thing is it's tied to your Azure AD account, so that identity piece again. And it basically means that if you don't have access to that document through your Azure AD identity, you're not going to be able to open that document. So I can copy it onto a USB stick. I can, send it to a friend. If they don't have the necessary kind of identity, they're not going to be able to access and open that document, is the great thing, if you are using kind of encryption and offline access within that sensitivity label. So I wouldn't recommend, the highest level of encryption on every document you send. It's more around kind of on the highly confidential, internal only. The marking of those documents with that encryption is probably what you want to target. Now, I have got some recommendations at the end, and I'll run through them. But typically, public sector organizations, they would typically use the government classification scheme. And that's what I'd recommend on that in terms of protecting your documents. It's a good starting point. And then kind of private organizations, you can take a stab at the Microsoft one. There are a few things that I would change about the Microsoft one. I think it's more just about the personal tag, and it's kind of confusing. But the really nice thing, and the one that I'm really, really keen on, is kind of sensitive labels at the container level. So we can use them at the document, and that protects the document. But what they've recently kind of GA'd was the sensitivity labels kind of a container. Now we can apply this to a 365 group. We can apply it to a SharePoint site. We can apply it to Teams, kind of all the same thing. But the really nice thing here is that changing the sensitivity of a team can control kind of whether we can have guests or not, whether the SharePoint site is allowed to be externally shared. So we can control at the Teams level, the SharePoint level, and we can also apply conditional access settings. Now, the conditional access settings are quite limited at this point in time, but it's more about whether we allow kind of download from unmanaged devices. So if you tag something in this example, say I have a Microsoft team, I could mark it as highly confidential, and that could automatically apply basically prevention of guests. It could stop the SharePoint site being shared and basically stop, well, we wouldn't have, and stop basically access from unmanaged devices. So you could basically control kind of what level they are. And the great thing here is that it basically allows your end users to help control that sensitivity, is the great thing. Now, it automatically applies the changes to the team or the group. So users can go change that sensitivity. They might start working on a project. It might be, confidential. They might want to up that to highly confidential. They can go change the team settings, and basically at that point, it could enforce, additional controls around data protection. It can change the external user access, sharing, and kind of the access from unmanaged devices. This is very powerful. I like this one a lot, certainly in terms of helping users to crack on and basically get going with it is the thing. So that one is one that's really worth enabling and looking at. Now, I do have some oh, sorry, go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to say on this one, Luke, when we were looking at the use cases earlier on, one of the things that I think is important to our end users is that, as much as possible, they don't want to have to think about this stuff.
Okay.
So from an end user perspective, what level of automation is available here? I was
going to come to it, but that's fine. I did want to talk about in the last slide. I slightly forgot. Now, this one always irked me a bit, but we have sensitive labels at the document label or the document level, and there's a few different ways of looking at that. Now, in your standard E3 offering, you're going to have no automation. It is really the thing there, unless you write some code to do it. What you're going to end up having is basically manual application of these labels, and that basically is kind of, I would say, a real rotter is the thing, because imagine you've got 10 million documents. Yeah, it's an absolute swine. Now, when you go to the E5 level, we have automation there to automatically apply these things. And these sensitivity labels, I'm not going to cover retention labels today, because that's about, I guess, retention of data, but it isn't one that I chose to talk about today. But the automatic application of sensitivity labels is very powerful, and that can be done on sensitive information types. It can be done on custom sensitive information types. It can be done on regular expression. I think it can be done on dictionary, word lists. It can be done on a whole heap of things. But the key thing is, and my final one, actually, that's an E5 and I completely forgot, is trainable classifiers is the really cool one. And this is really powerful technology. So we can feed it an example of a highly sensitive document. We can feed it 500, like seed content, as they call it. You feed it 500 copies of an incredibly sensitive document to your organization. The tool can learn what does that look like and build a sensitive information type around that. And it can understand, it builds a trainable classifier off the back of that. and we can use that to automatically apply sensitivity labels to those documents moving forward. So if the tool, or Microsoft 365, I should say, can recognize that specific type of content using that trainable classifier, it can automatically apply that. And that's not making use of kind of the usual sensitive information types, which is regular expression, dictionary, list. These are things like the typical social or the typical sensitive information types you're going to use in your E3 are things like, social security numbers, bank account numbers, IBAN numbers, national insurance numbers for UK, GDPR data. These are the things that you're going to be looking at and can basically make use of, but it's not going to automatically apply that sensitivity label at the E3 level. So that's the one that kind of grinds my gears. I probably put it that way. It's a bit of a swine is the thing. For groups, I don't think there is any sort of automation there at the moment, Zoe. I think your best bet really is basically, this one is a bit trickier at the moment. I don't really have a great answer to make it easier for users is the thing. I did put kind of some thoughts together around how I would recommend kind of rolling these ones out. And basically, I think, the key ones here are really, I've got a nice bit on user adoption on the right, because I don't really have a great answer in terms of automating it for container level. I think the best bet for that really is going to be more about, education at this point in time, because the only way, oh gosh, all right, let me get a move on. So the things I would say here is we would basically configure a baseline sensitivity label. We'd use different kind of sensitivity labels for groups and documents. Basically, if you're going to use the default labels, just configure or just double check kind of the description settings in terms of encryption watermarking. You can restrict who can create public and external groups, so you could scope those container level sensitivity labels to a specific set of users, which allows basically specific people to change that and can change the access settings to those teams. We would roll it out to a specific group, and basically that's kind of the user adoption piece, and basically pilot it, test it with them, iterate it, and basically help train those guys into how better to classify it. The final one I want to talk about briefly was data loss prevention, and basically what this can do and how it can facilitate making it easier to stop kind of data exfiltrating your organization. Now, I realize I'm running out of time, so I'll keep it brief, but we can use DLP to kind of detect sensitive data in your organization. We can use it to protect, so we can encrypt or restrict access to it and stop sharing it. And we can also monitor, so we can use Content Explorer to see what kind of sensitive information types are in your organization. We can use DLP for Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive out of the box, and that's E3, but the Teams is basically an E5 one, and basically that's kind of locked away. The other one I was going to call out specifically, and this is again is more about data leaving, is the new data loss prevention for endpoint, and this is very powerful. It's kind of the replacement for Windows information protection. We can basically restrict access to sensitive data. We can stop them copying via Bluetooth, printing out a document. We can stop them copying to other apps. We can stop them uploading to cloud services and network shares and RDP. So this stuff is crazy powerful. The only problem I have with it at the moment is it's not really that easy to use with BYOD, because you have to register a client if they're not using Defender for endpoint. So you'd have to kind of onboard devices, which is a bit of a swine for BYOD. My final recommendation for DLP, because I'm running out, I would have run over a bit more on DLP, but let me take you through some high-level recommendations that I would do. Typically on any sort of client rollout, I would typically do two policies. One is going to basically be for a low volume of kind of sensitive information types, and the other is going to be for high volume of sensitive information type. We would typically, on the low volume of sensitive information type, you'd notify the user with policy tips and let them know that they're sharing something that they shouldn't really, because it might be a legitimate case is the thing. They might be sharing one credit card detail, one kind of national insurance number, and that's perfectly well and fine. We just have the ability to override. The thing that I would look at more, I would say, carefully is a high volume of kind of sensitive information types leaving your organization, and what do we want to do there? So typically, I would always, if it's over 10 items or maybe over 20, whatever your risk level is, you can set that and say what we want to do. And typically, I would notify an information security team. And if you feel like it's too many, we can set up a block and kind of restrict access to that is the important thing. Now, apologies, I didn't get to cover it as much as I'd like on DLP, and I'd like to thank you for listening. But it's kind of any questions at this point in time.
Yeah, I think first, just one thing I would add on DLP is One of the things that I did internally when we rolled this out, it must have been a couple of years ago now, was for those people who were sharing one credit card number, maybe they had a legit reason for it, but I actually made sure that that me and the team were notified about it. And we actually went and showed them how to encrypt their emails instead. So even if people are just sharing one and they're not doing a high volume of it, actually what we still want to do is teach them, that there are better and safer ways to do this. And I think just to finish off as well, I think, it's quite clear that the tools are there for IT to keep our users safe while they're working, and that we as organisations have a responsibility to make sure that we're actually configuring them as well. So you can get that balance between usability and security, or you can have your cake and eat it, but actually it's going to cost you. As Luke was saying, as we went through, so many of the features that actually help you get this balance, that they're locked away behind P2 add-ons, or the full fat E5 license. And to me, I understand where Microsoft are coming from, but it's a bit of an annoyance really, because it's the only way to get that balance really.
Mm-hmm. Certainly with that automation piece, you're going to be stuck without that kind of E5 in terms of, or the advanced compliance E5 in really terms of automatically labeling those documents, the content that's stored within Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. There's no way that you're going to either write the code to do it, or basically, have your users manually classify that content is the problem.
Yeah, we did an exercise for one customer actually, where we looked at how many documents they had, mm-hmm. and how many users they had, and how much time it would take. And it was something like, for them to manually classify all their stuff, it would take them 2 years.
That was like 20 million files or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And based on like 2 seconds a file, which was kind of generous, is the thing. For me, it's going to take longer than that to understand the context of a document and kind of what the sensitivity of it should be considered as. What was I going to say? So, questions from my side. Yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope the pace wasn't too bad. Like Zoe said, it's kind of the first time we're running through this deck. I hope the technology that I touched upon was relevant, and the configurations recommendations were helpful. It's probably the best way I'd put it.
Thank you, Zoe and Luke. That was a very, very insightful presentation. One thing, I think your presentation and Sam's complemented each other very, very well, because we had all the sort of, the fancy team stuff on the front end from Sam, and I don't think people probably realise what actually goes into protecting a team's environment, and the scale you have to go to protect it at a decent level, and that's what your session did. That's explained really well. So thank you both. Thank you all, Sam and yourselves, for that. I think you answered one from Chris earlier. Does anybody else have any questions?
I think while we wait for additional questions, just touching on that point about how much work goes into actually making it secure. We do see this a lot with customers, where they think, well, I use Teams, it's easy, I know what I'm doing, and they just think that actually they don't. It's not even that they don't need help, but I just think they don't know what they don't know, so they don't actually understand that all of this stuff has to be considered in the background for people to be able to use it safely. And they just think, I can flick a button in a tenant, we can turn it on, we can push the app out to people, job done. And we do see this, and typically it takes us quite a while. So it's not with all of them, you get some customers who are good, but for those who have that view, it could be quite challenging to get them to understand actually all of this stuff that you do need to think about. I don't know if anyone else on the call has similar experiences.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
And could I ask? Sorry, could I interject? Was the technology, was it the right level to pitch at, do you think, guys, in terms of the technology? Because I'm obviously canvassing feedback. It's the first time we trotted it out, is the thing. So I'm just wondering, did it make sense? Was it too high? Well, I doubt that, but too low level, or too high level, I should say. Sorry.
Personally, I think so. I'm big on identity. That's kind of one of my stronger points. I think it was very good. I think it was. I mean, are you aiming at an intermediate level, or are you
probably beginner to intermediate? I'm not trying to I'm not trying to go hardcore and kind of run through every kind of configuration I would make and the low level stuff.
Well, actually, I mean, so the one that we've got accepted at Comsverse, it's actually 2 sessions, and it's basically going to be an extended version of this. And because of the way that they've split the days, so the first day is level 100 and 200, and the second is 300 and 400. And what we wanted to do was a bit of a battle, you know, like in the red corner, thing, you know, but that kind of straddles both the days really. So we on the first day we're going to have like the user perspective, which will be more around, you know, the user experience, and then on the second we're going to go into more of the technical config. So I think we'll actually go into more detail on that one. Do you think, Luke?
I think there'll probably be a bit more, and we'll probably touch on a few other technologies we might want to make use of, and probably a bit more about exact configurations or what I would probably do.
So personally, from me, like I said, I know Identity pretty well, but what I found interesting was how it's all linked to Teams. That's probably the element that I wasn't quite aware of. That, okay, I know all this about Identity, like, you know, Exchange Online and even like SharePoint, but the way you linked it to Teams, that was very interesting for me. Personally, the level was fine. There was I think the pace was good as well.
The rest at the end, but
well, yeah, that thing is, I don't think you'll have that problem when you do it in person.
Yeah.
I mean, how long have you got? How long are the sessions at Comsverse?
They won't be an hour, will they? So you'll have like
45 minutes. It's 45 minutes.
It's all right. Me and Luke can both talk faster when we're in person. We get excited.
A million miles an hour. So
When you're up there on the stage and you've got 100 eyes looking at you, you'll be off quick.
I'll be rocking and rolling. Cool.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Like I said, I've kind of been looking forward to this one for a while. Mainly for that Surface Hub. It's a right piece of kit. But no, thank you, Zoe and Luke, for making time as well. Thank you for everyone who's joined this evening. Just a bit of an announcement about our May event. May is going to be AWS month for us. We are the cloud user group, so we're trying to keep it agnostic as possible. I can hear everyone booing as I say it. But it is going to be AWS focused. We actually have Kirk Ryan, Microsoft MVP, and also AWS Cloud Builder, I think he is. And we also have Kyle Jenner, not Kylie Jenner, Kyle Jenner. And that they're going to be doing a lot of some really good demos around infrastructure as code, I believe, and also doing some infrastructure with Terraform deployment. So that's what we've got to look forward to next month. So yeah, thank you everybody for this evening. And the recording will be up next week, hopefully, on our YouTube channel. So yeah, thank you everybody. Oh, before I go, sorry, got to give a round of applause. Everyone come off mute. A round of applause for Zoe and Luke.
Thank you. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thanks for having us. It was great, actually.
Awesome. Yeah. And Sam, we'll see you in September.
Yeah, nice.
Definitely. Looking forward to it.
Just be nice to, I don't know if it'll be allowed to hug, but it'll just be nice to actually have a beer with like people in person.
Definitely. I think the pre-event party, I think, is still going ahead. That's what spoke to Mark, so we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers guys. Thank you.